Hello all and welcome to Conversations on Leadership, a podcast by Academy Wales. Our guest for this episode is Craig Flannery. Craig, welcome.
Good morning.
So to kick off, I thought it'd be really nice if you could just give our listeners a bit of details on yourself, your background and what you're currently doing.
Okay, so first of all, great to be here. Thanks for the invite. So as you said, my name's Craig Flannery. I'm the Chief Fire Officer for Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service. Been in that service now for 24 years. Prior to that, I used to teach scuba diving and feed sharks overseas. So a little bit different. So 24 years in Mid and West. I've not moved around fire services, but I have had a couple of secondments during that period of time and still feel it's the best job in the world.
And one thing you're quite heavily involved in at the moment is this work and organisational change within the fire service. What have you found is most effective in influencing behaviours in shifting those organisational cultures, especially in something like the fire service, with such strong traditions?
I think just to start with, I think it's to start kind of understanding that people don't fear change, they fear loss. Yeah. And especially with a service like mine that's got proud traditions in helping people when they're having the worst day of their lives, and probably over the last 15 years moving more into a preventative role, and does that mean we're losing our identity of responding? So I think for me, it has to start at the top. You need to walk the walk and role model those kind of behaviours and changes that you want to see others exhibit as well. So for example, we need to acknowledge our mistakes. We're human beings at the end of the day. When you make decisions, sometimes you get it wrong. And so if you're going to create a psychological safe environment where people feel that they can speak up and speak out and actually get things wrong, then you need to start demonstrating that top. And I have got a whole box of failures. And I think that's part of the growing that you do as a leader. So I think role modeling really important. One of those is acknowledging mistakes and also, I guess, your vulnerabilities as well. So when you're communicating with staff, when you're engaging with staff, for it to be authentic, they need to see some of those vulnerabilities. And sometimes you need to say, look, I don't have all the answers right here, right now, but talking it through with people helps you get to a best resolution. So meaningful dialogue, lots of engagement with staff. And I think our service, just over 12 months ago, we had a real damning report, a cultural report. And I think it's fair to say we're owning it and we're doing something about it. And it was one of those instances, I think, where the courageousness of the previous Chief Fire Officer, Roger Thomas, that said, look, when it comes to putting fires out, rescuing people from cars and entrapments and things like that, we're really good at that. When it comes to culture and understanding what does cultural change look like, he stuck his hand up and said, do you know what, we're going to bring some independent consultants in to help us with that journey. And hand on heart, I can honestly say 12 months on with those independent culture advisors, we're well on that journey now. I know it sounds really cliche, but we're changing the way that we're making decisions, we're streamlining our effectiveness, and we are changing some of the structures within the service, all of which is to accommodate this kind of change that we're pushing forward on.
How do you build and maintain trust across those teams, particularly in these moments of change?
I think trust is all based on relationships, and that's the foundational piece for me. How we build relationships within our service, how we connect with other human beings is really important. And that's regardless of it being the fire service, a critical time-pressured environment. It doesn't matter wherever you are, whichever industry you're in, public, private or voluntary. I think when we talk about trust, it starts with the relationship that we have with each other and that human connection. So I think that's really important. I think the other aspect to that then, and it's something that I've been practicing for quite a while now, is when I'm kind of engaging or speaking with my middle management or senior management team, the question I often ask is, how well do you know your people? Yeah. Because that will give me an insight straight away into, is this person leading and managing with that deliberate intention of putting the people first, or have we got some work to do? And I can often judge the efficacy of a team based upon that simple question. And it's a question that I ask myself often as and when I am out and about in different departments that I might not have had much to do with previously. So how well do you know your team? How well do you know your people? And I think a lot of that stuff comes back to Stephen Covey and first seek to understand. So if you can understand your people, and don't get me wrong, this isn't about knowing every single personal detail, But this is about understanding an individual, their makeup, their values, what's important to them, what their motivations are. And I think then when we start talking about authenticity and trust, I really believe in aligning strengths. Mm-hmm. So I think the more senior that I've become within the organisation, I've recognised that I could spend a lot of time with you on your weak areas, mm-hmm. and vice versa, and perhaps at best get mediocrity. Yeah. Or I can work on those areas that we can strengthen and become absolutely excellent in. And I think it's different in different areas of the organisation, and it's something that I recognise and I preach about myself, and that strength alignment's really important. And I think the final thing for me is, and it was really interesting because we appointed just this week a new director in my service, a director of people and culture. And one of the things, I mean, her presentation was inspiring, as was the interview. I could have carried on with it all day. But one of the things that she talked about was being nice and being kind, two different things. And being kind is demonstrating that you do have people's back, but it also means you calling them out when you need to as well, as opposed to being nice where we don't have difficult conversations. So I think, yeah, when we talk about authenticity and trust, it's about relationships, it's about human connection, it's about making sure that people feel that you have their back, but part of having that back is difficult conversations if they're needed.
How do you balance the urgency of the day-to-day operations with longer-term leadership work, like developing and shaping culture?
Yeah, so it's that age-old perennial issue of short-term versus long-term, isn't it? And walking the fine balance between them. And I think for me is don't treat them as being exclusive, treating them as symbiotic. They both need each other, and there's a time and a place for both. And I think one of the things I've been talking over the last 6 months since I've been in this new role as the Chief Fire Officer is that I liken it to cogs in a watch. Different size cogs, all pulling together, different rotational speeds, all doing slightly different jobs, but ultimately telling the time. And I think, the short term versus a long time is very similar to that in terms of we'll get short term sprints, but we need to still maintain a longer term mindset and presence. And I think the one thing in Wales that stands out from other countries, especially within the UK, is the Future Gens Act, when we talk about those principles of working and that longer term vision. And what I'm trying to do now is bring that back into my service, because I think, unfortunately for the fire service, we are in an annual budget cycle setting, like a lot of public sectors are. And it's how do you create a longer term vision and future and resilience when your money comes on an annual basis.
What do you do personally to stay resilient and reflective? And how does that influence your leadership style?
Going back to what I just said about short-term and long-term, about it being symbiotic, I think there's a symbiotic relationship between, resilience and reflective practice as well. I think one supports the other. So I look at it, and one of my previous mentors that I worked for a number of years ago talked about your personal, professional and learning swim lanes, and that you've got to keep topping all of those three kind of swim lanes up. And there's different ways of doing that. And one of the things that I've really benefited from, and I guess the reason why, I put myself forward to come up to summer school to help with the coaching faculty piece, is that I've had great results and great insights from having an executive coach. Through my executive coach, I've been able to explore some of the issues in ways that I would never have been able to do before, which has helped me solve the issue and get on top of it. So I think when you talk about reflective practice and reflections, I think everybody should have a coach, regardless. I think it's really beneficial. I think that during my kind of professional swim lane, I've always looked at things that will stretch your kind of intellect and learning. AI is something I've been learning more about of late, not necessarily in terms of a personal use, but from an organisational standpoint of how we can use AI to better support competencies across my operational staff, which then supports the community, because if we can create better, more competent kind of officers in terms of the work that they do, then obviously we're gonna do better at the work that we do across prevention, protection, response. So I think for me, it's about stretching your intellect and the learning and seeking feedback. The executive coach will help you with some of that stuff, but senior leadership experience from Academy Wales was really helpful for me about 3 years ago. I've then become part of a hub now of the senior leadership experience with held our Health Board and Commandership Council. I do 360s, I have one-to-one sessions with what I would term my go-to people, where I know they will give it to me straight, unfiltered, and quite raw. So I think feedback is really important to make sure that you're fully self-aware, and that helps with your resilience as well. I know it's going to sound really low level this, but protecting my Fridays for doing the work. One of the things I tend to do is when I rock up to HQ, I grab a coffee, and for the duration of me drinking that coffee and walking the campus, going and speaking with people, engaging, understanding what that work looks like, and then I'm into meetings and everything else. And so I find that that's part of my leadership element, but I also have to do the work as well. So I try and protect my Fridays now to enable me to balance the work up, get on top of things, help my kind of resilience that way. And I think probably finally the last bit of personal resilience and reflective practice, it's about recognising the link between physical and mental health and the relationship between the two. So prior to getting this job 6 months ago, I do a lot of cycling, triathlon training and swimming. That is my go-to training environment to work on the physical side, decompress the mental side. So I think acknowledging the physical and mental relationships there and keeping yourself healthy there is really important.
There will be people listening to this who are having to lead through quite a lot of uncertainty at the moment. What would be one piece of practical, actionable advice you'd give to them?
I think my philosophy has been and always will be to embrace it, accept it, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think is the first aspect of this, the burden of leadership. Expect turbulence, that whole kind of amplification of that loss and the fear factor, and just getting comfortable with that. And I think when you do that, anchor yourself in your clear sense of purpose. Go back to what your purpose is. And I've used this certainly in the last 6 months when curveballs have come in, when I felt quite dysregulated and outside my window of tolerance. I've gone back to, why are we doing what we're doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And that clear sense of purpose has pulled me out of that kind of anxiety bit straight away. And I think linked to that is self-awareness. For me, self-awareness is almost a survival skill for strategic leaders. So practice it, hone it, get your feedback, make sure you're getting the ground truth. Feedback is a gift, especially if it's honest feedback. And I think anybody that's got an opposing viewpoint on what you're trying to do, be curious about that, because it gives you much more information and legitimacy in terms of the way you're going forward. And I guess with that clear sense of purpose is communicate it relentlessly. Remind your organisation why we exist, why we're here. And it's a bigger calling than a job, being more of a vocation. And I think that will help as well.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for being here, Craig. I've enjoyed this. I think it's been really thought-provoking, and I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
Yes, thank you, and diolch yn fawr.
Mae un podlediad Sgwrsiau ar Arweinyddiaeth ar gael trwy ein gwefan. Mae'r hawlfraint y podlediad yma yn cael ei gadw gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Our Conversations on Leadership podcast is available through our website. Copyright of this podcast is held by the Welsh Government.